for Tempe trees. And I'm going to tell you a little bit how this came about. So a few weeks ago, I had the chance to sit down and meet Richard Adkins, who is Tempe's urban forester. And I had such a great time listening to him talk about the trees in Tempe, how many trees we have, what kind of trees we had. And it just seemed like there was such great information there that I wanted other people to be able to hear from him and have him share that information with you also. One of the things that I thought was so important out of this time that I had with him was realizing that we are so incredibly lucky to have an urban forester in the city of Tempe, and we're so lucky to have Richard here with us. So I would like to introduce him to you. So Richard Adkins, welcome to the webinar.
Well, thank you very much, Councilmember. I appreciate that. Thank you for the introduction. Boy, we got a lot of people on here that are just interested about talking about trees in the evening. I love this. This is very exciting. I'm sure everybody has some questions, but I would like to just give a quick overview as a start of a little bit about trees in Tempe, and then answer some questions about what's going on with all the heat, and maybe talk a little bit about biology so that we have a firm understanding of why now. It's been hot before. So, I mean, why all of a sudden this year are we seeing quite a bit of mortality in our urban forest? So, to start, well, my name is Richard Adkins. I am the urban forester for the city of Tempe. I've been here about a year, and it is my task to try to take care of all the trees in the city. Basically the ones on city property, of course, but I also try to answer your questions as residents of Tempe and provide you assistance as I can. So we have 26,500 trees within the city of Tempe on Tempe maintained property, of which we were responsible before. And of that 26,500, there's over 100 different species and varieties of trees. You probably didn't think there was that much diversity. And that's something that I really want to maintain, is the diversity of the trees, both in species as well as age, so that we don't get just an even age stand in our urban forest. Now, our canopy coverage is about 13.6%, excuse me. And that's citywide on public property as well as private. And the city of Tempe has a goal of 25% canopy coverage by 2040. So, you know, we're about halfway, and so we've got a little bit of work to do. I do want to say that the 26,000 trees that we have, a replacement value is about $57 million if we had to replace every one of those trees, and they provide about $1.2 million in benefits annually to us residents here in Tempe. So if that's what our city trees are worth, just think of what the trees are worth on your property. And there's easy ways to calculate that, and if a question comes up, I can talk about that as we go into it. So what about the heat? Why are trees being affected this year more than others? People have asked me. Well, we've had 53 days of over 110 degrees. 11 of those were straight, you know, about 115 degree days. And then it's been a long time. I mean, we were in the first 2 weeks of October, and it was still 105 degrees yesterday. So that's something that I want everybody to think about. I start talking a little bit about some of the biology here, is when is the heat more damaging to our trees? At the beginning of the season or later in the season, as we're experiencing now? So obviously, heat affects trees. I mean, we can see that, and we've had all this heat, and we've had fairly extreme drought. Most of the county and the state, actually, about 60% of the state is experiencing extreme drought conditions right now. So, I mean, most people know the effect of lack of moisture and how that affects trees. And so you got to think about how trees transpire. And transpiration is the roots are pulling in the moisture from the soil up through the column of the tree, and then it goes out through the leaves. About 90% of the water that the roots take in actually moves through the tree and is transpired out through the leaves. Now, of course, that creates a cooling effect. So that's why you're standing under a tree. Other than the shade, you also have an ambient air temperature that's being cooled, sort of like a swamp cooler, by the transpiration going through the leaves. So now as leaves start to lose more water than the roots can absorb, you've all seen it, the leaves start to wilt. So that's the natural way that the tree is starting to conserve moisture. It's by shutting down the stomata so it's not going to lose the water, right? But so then when we have ambient air temperatures at 115, 118 degrees, that cooling effect over the leaf surface is now not there. So now you have the surface temperature of the leaf that is starting to heat up. And when we have ambient air temperatures between 116 to 120 degrees, that's basically a thermal threshold that cell damage starts to happen and the leaf actually starts to die. So, I mean, you can see we've had temperatures that have been that hot, and as they keep going on, the duration and the frequency of these temperatures, that threshold tends to decrease and goes down into the low hundreds. So while it might be hot in June, when we get these hot temperatures that are continuous in August, September, into October, that's why we've seen a lot of tree decline in just the last 2 to 3 weeks from what I've been observing. So just wanted to put that out there a little bit. You see how the heat can really affect the cellular functions, and then that stops photosynthesis. The trees still respire. So basically with heat and water stress, you start having plant starvation. The tree it can't make up as much energy as what it's losing, right? So as tree starts to go into decline and starts to collapse. And with that increased stress, well, then we have a higher incidence of pest and disease that will affect the tree's health, right? I'm seeing a lot of sooty canker around the valley right now for most of the thin bark trees where they have been sunburned, and the sooty canker spores are really starting to spread, especially as the humidity is increasing a little bit. So people say, okay, Richard, well, that's great. So you've told us why it's happening. What can we do about it? Well, a lot of it is the right tree in the right place, good species selection, and I'm sure I'll have some questions about certain species. The other is just, honestly, we need to make sure that we have good soil moisture. And I'm talking about a homogeneity of soil moisture. So where it's even throughout, the root zone of the tree. I was talking to some residents the other day, and they sent me in some pictures, and honestly, their tree was dead. It was already past that point. And they're like, well, what could I have done? And I asked them about their irrigation over the summer, and they had never changed it from the winter or the spring. It was like, well, it's an automatic watering system. It's providing water. Well, with this increased and sustained heat, we need to really increase our frequency and our volume of water. And I'm not just talking putting down water, I'm talking managing irrigation, and there is a difference. So we want to make sure that our soil is moist all the way around the root zone. And it could have to be a little bit more frequent than what we might be used to. And then I always like mulches. I'm a very good proponent of organic mulches, composted bark mulch that actually will moderate and buffer soil temperature fluctuations. So that can actually affect the soil by 10 to 20 degrees in some places. And it also holds the moisture in a little bit more. So, we're not trying to increase the water bill so much here, but more watering appropriately and for the species of need. Hopefully that makes some sense. So a quick overview, and I'm sure I can touch into a little bit of this more as we get into some questions, which hopefully you have, and some more species discussion. So with that, I'd say let's open it up and see if I can provide you any assistance.
Kristen, do you have any questions for us?
Not yet, but we've had a lot of people who have joined us kind of during that initial presentation. So I want to remind you all again, you can enter questions in the Q&A section, which is next to the chat feature. And for those of you who have dialed in, and I see there are a couple of you on the phone who obviously don't have the Q&A feature, you can send emails directly to me at Kristen_Gwynn@tempe.gov. That's KRISTIN_GWINN@tempe.gov. Margaret is asking, what type of mulch would you recommend for trees?
Well, the mulch that that City of Tempe used to provide, where they had the mulch pit, it's partially composted. The larger chunks, not the really fines that you can find that's already been screened, that you would put like in your pots for flowers or for vegetable garden or something like that. That's too fine. I want the bigger chunks. You can get it at some of the big box stores, and there's a couple of places here in the valley that actually produce this composted mulch from the green waste that comes off of the trees in the landscape. I like to have it about 2 to 4 inches thick as well.
Mike is asking, can amendments be done to the soil around existing trees to help the moisture retention of the soil as well as utilizing mulch?
Well, that's a very good question. The amendments, I like to use humic acid is a very good amendment that you can work into the soil that gives it a little bit more organic matter and kind of has the soil has a better exchange capacity for nutrients, as well as helps to hold the moisture in a little bit more. Hopefully that made sense. And then if you have this composted mulch and working that back in, so you're building that tilth around the root zone of the tree, that helps to hold the moisture. There are some polymers that a lot of people have touted to use that suck up moisture and then release it slowly. I've seen some benefit of those. They can get fairly expensive to try to install in the soil. And honestly, though, I think a good compost mulch and mixing in some humic acid and some more organic material is a better way to go.
Okay, Marie says, our sumac is getting quite brown at the top. If the top is brown, is the tree dead? Also, what is the normal lifespan of a sumac? Ours is quite elderly.
Sumac, very good question. Sumacs are one, I have a small list of the species that are really taking it hard. Sumacs are one of those. If the top has died back, that's the first thing where the tree is starting to what we call retrench itself. So it's maintaining the lower growth, but the top it's basically given up on that. So you could just cut the dead out of that. It's not necessarily the beginning of the end, but it's the tree telling you that, yes, I'm over that backside of the curve a little bit on age, and I'm starting to stress a little bit. Around here in the valley for a sumac, if you're hitting about 50, 55 years of age, that's doing pretty good. You're going to start to expect to see a little bit of decline on that. But if it's just the top and the sides and the bottom are still doing well, you still might have opportunity to save that tree for a few more years.
Okay, Jana would like to know, overall, what are the best types of trees to plant here in Tempe?
And see, Jana, that's an extremely loaded question. It kind of really depends on your landscape and the form of what you have, and where you want to put it on your property and the benefits that you're looking for. Like I said, there's 100 species within our urban forest here. There's about 45 or so that are very common. And then there's about 20 that are really available in the nursery. I mean, you can find the others, but these are really available, and that's what's being sold mostly. If you have a more xeric or a desert type of landscape, the desert trees are the best. If you look around, the trees that we have lost in the city so far this summer, you see very few mesquites that have been lost, very few palo verdes, very few ironwoods, desert willows. They have a different leaf structure. That's something, I'm glad you brought that up. So they have different adaptations, our desert trees. So then people would say, well, Richard, you got to use native trees everywhere. Native trees will work in a lot of landscapes, but in some of our more mesic or wet parks, where you have grass and playground areas, you can't really have spined or thorned trees nearby a whole lot. So you have to have that mixture of species, right? So back to the shorter answer is all of your desert species are going to be very well adapted here. They have smaller leaves, so they have more surface area to volume. So they're actually going to cool the leaf better and cool the tree, and then provide you a very nice canopy as well. There are a couple of deciduous trees that you could use. The Chinese pistache, the red push pistache, are very drought tolerant. They do not sunburn very well. Some of the oaks are nice. The eucalyptus, I know a lot of people don't like eucalyptus, but there's some species of eucalyptus that are actually very favorable growth here in the valley. And same with gray leaves. I know people do not necessarily like the mulga, the Acacia anura. I hear a lot about that. There are other trees that look similar to that, the leatherleaf acacia, that I really like. But that glaucous leaf, that bluish gray color of leaf, actually has a greater albedo and actually reflects more of the solar radiation than a dark greener leaf. So not trying to get too in depth in that and geek out on leaf color too much for y'all, but grayer type leaf materials, native plants, and some of those other deciduous trees that I had mentioned are some that I would just give first consideration to. And then again, depending on your landscape, I'm happy to talk to you further about that, and we could probably narrow it down to 2 or 3 instead of 5 to 10.
That was a good question, though.
That's an excellent question.
Okay, from Allison, I have a tall silk oak tree that got hit hard. The branches at the top are dead, but I still have lots of green limbs. Any chance my tree will make it?
Silk oak. They were all planted like in the late 60s and the early 70s. Hard to find silk oaks anymore. I will ask the question back to you. Did you have it pruned recently? And if so, was it before March or after March?
Let's see.
Pruned 2 years ago.
Okay, then I'm feeling a lot better about it already. Silk oaks, they're getting pretty long. Most silk oaks in this valley are going to be 40 years, 35, 40, 45 years old. And they do start to die from the top back. If the bottom is still doing well and you still feel the leaves are not really browning or yellowing, they're still putting out some seed at that time in the spring, then it's probably going to be okay. The top is completely gone, so you will have to take the top out. You want to be careful not to over prune silk oaks. I've seen a lot around the valley that were pruned like in March, and they're all dead right now. They do not take to pruning and then the heat very much. There still is hope for the silk oak. That brings me to a point. Let me digress for a minute about pruning. Pruning during the summer is good for desert species. It's not good for your elms, your ashes, your pines, even the pistache. If you can avoid pruning those between May and October, the trees will love you for it and you will not see any issues. The mesquites, the palo verdes, ironwoods, they love being pruned in the summertime. So digression on pruning there. I just want to make sure, because I've had a lot of people call and say, well, I just had my China berry pruned and it was like beginning of August. Well, the China berry is most likely not going to survive through November. Just saying. So silk oaks, tough trees, hard to find anymore. Age going to be about 45, 50 years, and it's going to start to decline. Tops just dying back, you might be okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Sharon is saying that her African sumac is very sparse at the top branches, but has lots of very vigorous shoots on the trunk and larger branches, and the tree is about 40 years old.
Okay, all those, when you say vigorous, I can imagine, because I know sumacs fairly well, there's going to be sprouts all over the trunk of the tree and on the lower branches. I'm thinking that's what you're talking about. That's the tree trying to survive. The top is dying back, so it's pushing out all of the dormant buds that were kind of sitting on the branches and the trunk. It's just starting to just push out. It's to become a big bush, basically. And like I said, it's getting old. It's over the curve. It's starting to senesce. You can kind of pull the sides back in, a little bit of pruning in the winter time to keep it, but it's basically going to become more bush-like than tree-like, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard. Lynn is asking for suggestions for older citrus trees of 30 years or older. Suggestions on watering frequency, how long to water, and also what is the best time of day to water.
Citrus, some of them get older. You can get citrus. I've seen some about 65, 70 over in parts of the East Valley, and they're pushing it right there. Watering during the summertime, no matter which citrus it is, whether it's like oranges, grapefruits, lemons, limes, kumquats, I'd be watering at least every 6 to 7 days during the summertime. Now going into fall, I'm going to back it off to about 10 days. And then especially for an older tree like that, it should be okay. And then getting into winter about every 2 weeks. And when I say water, I'm not talking a drip type of water. I'm talking a flood basin around the tree and watering it and letting it dry out a little bit. So the top 2 inches of soil would be dry. That's the way that's the way I water my citrus. That's the way I would recommend watering yours. The best time, I like it at night or early in the morning. A good thing during the winter, if we ever get the chance where they're calling for a frost, is you want to water that citrus in the evening time and have it there, because actually as the water evaporates, it'll get kind of a heating effect and kind of warm that canopy up by maybe a degree or 2, which is sometimes all you need when we get frost coming through the valley. Hopefully that answered your question.
That's great information, Richard. I just want to let everybody know that somebody was asking about the Tempe's mulch program. And so Kristen put it in the chat, so you can look on there, and there's a link to the city's mulch program. Thank you. Thanks, Kristen.
Excellent. Thank you. They do have a very good quality product. They're chunky, big product. It's actually very nice. They do a good job down there.
Great. Thanks.
All right, from Kathleen, she says, we just had to cut down our 40-plus-year-old ash tree. Heartbreaking. We were told by a tree company that it was dead. They left the stump flush to the ground, and now green leaves are growing out of it. Did we cut it down prematurely? And are ash trees good trees in Tempe?
Okay, there's about 5 different varieties of ash. If it was that old and in Tempe, it was most likely a shamel ash as opposed to an Arizona. I mean, it could be either one, but it's most likely a shamel. That's about the age that they're going to get at. I would ask back, what did it look like? Was it completely brown? If it was just cut down, did you have any leaves on it at all? And sprouting back from the stump is very common for an ash, especially if it was not 100% dead. It could be, 90, 95%. Hard to say without really looking at it, but a lot of the ash trees did take a lot of damage and suffered a lot during this summer. And some of the old channels, again, I would ask you, was it in flood irrigation? Was it growing in turf? That's going to be a big difference. And I'm going to venture to say I don't think you cut it down prematurely, but the stumps will resprout. You can manage those sprouts off of the stump into another tree again if you were so inclined. If you wanted to call me, I could talk to you about that a little bit more.
Okay. She didn't answer your questions yet, so I have nothing for you there. But
and it's hard because there's a few more things that I can work in on with that. But yes.
Sure. Sharon would like to know if sisu trees and is this tibu trees, T-I-B-U, are they good in a lawn area?
Siso and tipu. Siso is Dalbergia siso and tipu tipuana. You've hit on some of my favorites. I like sisu trees. I am probably 1 out of 10 that actually like sisu trees. They are beautiful canopy, excellent shade trees. You have to give them space. They are great in a big flood irrigated front yard. And when I say big, 1/4 to 1/2 an acre. That would be great. A lot of people put them in patio homes or in small backyards. The roots are just way too aggressive. That's the only thing, the downfall to that species. Once you plant it, you will have it. And then you'll have 50 of them. And it's a very aggressive rooting tree. So if you were going to plant a sisu in your lawn area around your home, I would definitely not plant it within 20 to 25 foot of my structure. And I would make sure that, you definitely have space. It's not too close to a wall or a boundary between you and your neighbor. Tipuana is a beautiful tree, excellent for a front yard or backyard side. I would not say the same restrictions as I just did with a sisu, excuse me. They're not that aggressive of a rooter. They grow quite fast. You're going to have to prune it at year 3 because it'll start and it'll have 2 trunks. All tipus start out and they go 2 trunks. You've got to cut one of them off. I know it was hard, but then you have a nice single trunk tree, beautiful yellow flowers, excellent shade, very nice tree. We grow a lot of them here in our rights of way and in our parks.
Richard, Peggy is asking, how would she straighten a Palo Verde tree?
Peggy, how old is your Palo Verde tree?
Waiting to see if she answers.
There's a couple of ways.
I got nothing.
Okay.
Oh, 7 years. There it is. 7 years.
7 years. Okay. It leaned over either in a storm when it was young and it just set growing that way. At 7 years, you might be a little too long to try to straighten it. If you really wanted to, there's quite a bit of work. You need to dig out around the front side of where you want to pull it. So you're removing that soil and then you're pushing and pulling the tree up, hopefully not cracking or breaking the roots on the lean side, if that makes any sense. So you need to loosen up the soil. You try to pull it up and see if it'll stay. You'll probably have to have a support structure, which is more than just a wooden stake for a 7-year-old tree. You're talking metal stake, concrete, or guy wires, which I'm not a fan of. They can be dangerous. People trip over them into the ground. Unless you can move it now, if you can go push it, hey, and just push the tree, then you've got a lot better opportunity to straighten it. I'll tell you a trick, depending on how much space you have, is how you can prune it. I've taken trees that have a lean and how you prune the trunk and shape prune the crown and shape it. It gives you the illusion that it's actually growing straight. Even though you've got a leaning trunk, the crown is straight, a little bit larger on one side, smaller on the other. It still gives you full canopy. I hope that helped you with your situation.
Loretta is asking, what does sooty canker look like? Can it spread to nearby trees, and how soon does a person have to remove an infected tree?
Sooty canker. If you go, you're going to have on your thin bark trees. It's going to be on your ashes, your ficus. I did have another arborist tell me he actually found some on a pine. And so, it has potential to spread to all of our trees. If you will see a layer of bark on like a ficus or an ash, and it's papery thin. And so if the bark is peeling off and it looks very dark and black colored, you take your finger and rub on it and it looks basically like soot, like coal. I mean, just, wow, that came off and that was very dark and that was black color. That is sooty canker. Now, if it's just got a little black discoloration on the bark and you can rub it off and, oh yeah, there's a little bit of color there. That is not. I'm talking, this is dark and it comes off very thick on your finger. It is extremely, I don't want to say contagious because it spreads. That black is the spores. So they blow in the wind and they splash with the rain. And right now, the way that our trees, the health and stress our trees are in now, it's spreading very, very quickly. So if it's on a branch, it's like 2 or 3 inches, you need to go back down to where that branch is to the trunk and you need to remove it completely. And I would also treat my pruning equipment. I use Lysol to spray off any of my pruning equipment. It actually works quite well. I like it better than alcohol. Alcohol actually will rust the tools. And if you have any copper, like a copper fungicide, I usually try to treat any of the cuts that I have when I'm removing sooty canker. If it's on the trunk of the tree, I'm sorry, but that tree you're needed to probably remove it or it will spread to other trees on the property or even in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Jim is asking if there are any Asian psyllids found in Tempe or Maricopa County.
I have yet to hear of any, and I have had none that I have been told by either Extension or the Department of Ag from Arizona. Down in Yuma, there was a sighting a couple of years back. They had some, but in Maricopa, I have no knowledge of them being here. That's a very good question.
Patty is asking if the city of Tempe still has mulch available. I'm assuming the answer to that is yes.
You really need to check. They had some issues out there a while ago. They might have used a lot of it. I know that there's a small quantities available. You're really going to have to check with them to be 100% sure how much they're letting out.
Kevin says we lost our ash this year and we think it was from Texas root rot. What could we replace it with?
Texas root rot is very common. It's in the soils around here as trees get stressed. Texas root rot takes over and that tree will turn like within 3 days. That's the proverbial, well, it was alive yesterday. That doesn't happen a lot, but Texas root rot looks like that. There is a list, and I do not know it. I apologize, Kevin, on the top of my head. The University of Arizona has a list of susceptible and least susceptible trees to Texas root rot. It's very easy to find on the internet. If you just Google that list, you'll be able to find that, and you should be able to get a number of species there that you can work with.
Neil asking, given the proximity of mulch to the tree and the root zone, is elbow grease the only way to control weeds in that area?
Actually, once you get the mulch down, actually it controls the weeds for you. It won't do it in a day. A little bit of elbow grease for probably 3 to 6 months. And then you generally are not going to have much much weeds anymore growing in that mulch, as long as you keep it fresh and keep it topped up. The thing with mulch, we don't want to pile it against the trunk. I don't know if any of you have been up in the Pacific Northwest or on the East Coast. You see a lot of what we call volcano mulching. That's not really an appropriate horticultural procedure. You don't want to pile mulch up against the trunk. You want to leave that low right there and put it out as far as you want. But elbow grease for the first couple of months. After that, you might get an occasional weed or something in there, but the mulch is going to take care of that for you.
Okay, what would you recommend for large, older pecans with flood irrigation? As the irrigation schedule changes during the winter, should we water over the winter? Typically, there are a couple of months without any irrigation.
I was just looking at some pecan groves the other day in the East Valley. Old pecans, now they're getting old too. I mean, most of our pecans, some of the first ones here in the valley were planted like in the 20s and 30s. So they are getting on in age. Pecans go dormant. Well, let me rephrase that. They slow down in growth. They do lose their leaves so they can set bud. During the wintertime, I would advise probably one good flood watering for the pecan. Otherwise, during the summer, they like to be flooded, like to be dried, like to be flooded and dried. That would be kind of the angle I would go with pecans. If you have them in your yard situation and it's not flood irrigated, soaker hose or something like that, especially in the summers like we've been having, is what I would use. You're always going to get a little bit of branch dieback on a pecan. And that you just need to just cut those off as they die back. But I would give it one good watering during the winter time and then just start back up in the spring and summer, as I'm sure you're used to.
Okay. What are the very most heat and drought resilient tree species?
The very most. When I want to say heat resistance, I want us to also understand we got to work with the soil. So I can put a heat resistant species or a heat tolerant, drought tolerant species, but if I put it in a small section of soil, like along a streetscape or in the middle of a concrete patio or a shopping center parking lot, it's really not going to matter. You got to have that soil volume for the roots to grow into so that they have the moisture to draw off of as well as the nutrients to support the tree. That said, I'd go with ironwoods, I'd go with mesquites. That'd be my top two right off the top.
That was a
really
really
like fruitless olives, but that's me.
we have had such great questions tonight. I am so impressed with how many people have been attending and writing these questions in there. And Richard, your answers are amazing. I so appreciate your time, but I wanted to introduce one other person who is here with us tonight. We have Councilmember Lauren Kuby is also participating in the panel. So are here to join us. I just wanted to say thank you, Councilmember Kuby, for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
Thanks.
I extend the same thanks. It's very good for the support. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
All right, Kristen, you have your next question?
So many questions.
That's good.
Okay. Pistache tree. Bark has started falling off several feet above the ground level. Looks as if an animal just pulled it off, but only on the west side. Can the tree survive?
Could be an animal pulled it off. It says it's a pistache, so larger pistache, probably Chinese pistache. The bark just falling off. It sounds like that has been sun scalded. Pistache is not known to really sun scald that much. Depends on how much exposure it's getting on the west side. you're giving me that clue that that's probably a sun scald. Yes, the tree will most likely survive. If it's just a small area like that, coming into the winter, it'll start to heal over. You'll see some growth rolls from where the bark fell off, and it'll start to kind of cover and seal that a little bit. You'll have a kind of a hole there, so to speak, in the bark, but it should survive.
Does the city have any resources for disease control for trees, especially Dutch elm disease? Rupinder says, I've been seeing a lot of dead elm trees around the city, including mine. What should I do about it, and what can the city help with, if anything?
Okay, elms, depending on where the elms are, all of our elms here are lace bark elms, evergreen elms, almost parvifolia. We do not have Dutch elm disease here in Maricopa County. It has not been identified. And we have no other types of insects that are feeding on the elms like you have in other parts of the country. The same with ash. We do not have emerald ash borers here. It's in Denver area, but it is not crossed over the desert here, so we don't have anything in that for right now. Elms, it kind of depends on where the elm is. They do not like reflected sunlight, reflected heat. If they got a big turf area, elms usually do quite well. If they're in granite or they're really near a street with a western exposure or sidewalks or either like front windows or something, they will sun scald and they will decline. As far as disease issues, there's nothing really spreading or contagious or really anything in the environment or the community that I'm aware of on elm trees. So as far as us having a program for control, there's nothing of that right now.
Okay, I've got two questions related to watering. One simply says, once a tree shows signs of stress, is it too late, or can watering revive it now that our temps are going to be cooling off? And the second one is specific to a mature elm tree that was lost this year, and they are on a flood irrigation lot, and they were surprised to lose the tree. So she's asking, should we have been doing intermittent watering in between the scheduled city irrigation days?
I am surprised that the elm, most of the time in flood irrigation, most of those trees did quite well, but throughout the valley, I did see some trees and some elms and some ashes and some pines actually in flood that did die. The thing about the elm is I want to look at the soil and the compaction of the soil. Water is quite heavy. It is 8 pounds per gallon, and flood irrigation over a 40-year period without really aerating the soil does actually compact the soil, decreases the amount of oxygen, and that could have an effect on the overall health of the tree. That's part of that one. The other for timing, no. If a tree is starting to wilt, you give it water, you can indeed revive it. When we have heat like this, it's best to water it a little bit before, a lot during, and then following it up now with a nice, good soaking. The tree should be okay. Always want to try to give it a little bit, unless it's completely brown and the branches are brittle, then you're watering the soil, which is fine for the soil moisture, but not so much for the tree any longer. Hopefully that answered both of your questions. The elm one in flood irrigation, that is tough. There could be some other issues with the root structure underground, girdling roots, soil compaction. That would need a little bit more investigation.
Okay, Mike says, I normally fertilize my ash trees this time of year, as well as Valentine's Day and Memorial Day. Will fertilizing a stressed tree now actually hurt it?
Mike, the simple answer to that is yes. Do not fertilize your stressed ash tree. Fertilizing stressed trees actually makes it, exacerbates the situation and can cause the tree to go into further decline. I like fertilizing trees like ash. I think the fall fertilization is great. Spring is okay. To me, fall is the more important fertilization because it's in the ground. The roots are still actively growing because we do not get really freezing temperatures here. So then the nutrients, the roots are all sitting there together. When spring comes, it's ready to take off and grow. So when you fertilize in the spring after it's already leafed out, you've kind of missed that big push of growth. But right now, with the way the heat's been, I'm advising no fertilizer until probably after Thanksgiving. It's kind of where I'm going now. With stress trees, you definitely don't want to fertilize.
Okay. Are citrus trees being affected by drought or heat?
Absolutely. That's a simple one-word answer. Yes, they can, especially the older ones. They have to have, citrus needs its irrigation. Like I said, in the summertime, it's got to be at least once a week. If it's a maturing citrus, if it's younger, you're probably going to need to do it every 3 days, depending on the soil that you have around it. Best to check, use either like a metal rod or a long screwdriver. If you can just go and push it into the soil and it goes all the way in, your soil moisture is good. If you're sitting there beating it with a hammer trying to get it into the soil, well, then we need to have some water going. It's nice to have the top inch or 2 inches of soil to become dry before you water it again. That way you're not creating anaerobic conditions and giving it too much water. You will see some sunburn on the leaves of citrus on the western side. They just turn kind of a dull yellow color. Not a nutrient deficiency. Definitely those are just the leaves that have been sunburned. They're protecting the rest of the crown. You definitely don't want to prune a citrus anywhere close to prune or take off anything in the summertime. Even if it's a dead branch, it's still providing shade for the rest of the trunk. Citrus are very thin bark. That's why you see them painted white a lot of the time, because it reflects the solar radiation off of the trunk to keep it from sunburning. So no pruning of citrus until like mid-February, please.
Okay. I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but it says I have a large Elderica pine with Elderica pine with several dead branches in different random locations. Is that a sign of heat or water stress or something more? Unfortunately, I was forced to do some pruning in July.
Unfortunately, I was forced to do pruning in July. That's tough. The one thing about pruning pines in July is you get sap everywhere, which is not a bad thing other than you just got to clean up all the sap. It doesn't really hurt the tree so much. It just shows you that the tree is alive and working and doing its thing. The sap is flowing. Random branches within that, it could be a sign of what they call blight, which is, in my opinion, an environmental condition. A lot of people are of the mind that it's kind of it's a mite caused, and you have just certain branches flagging throughout the crown. What I would do, if it's just a branch here, branch there, I would wait until the winter time and see then how the rest of the tree looks, and then I would remove those branches. A thing about pine trees that a lot of people don't always understand, because it comes to winter, right? We've been talking about water schedules for winter. And if you've noticed, I've decreased the water in the winter because it's gotten a little cooler. A lot of people do that. Pine trees need winter water. They're Mediterranean species, the ones that we have here. You have to water them in the wintertime. That's when the species would be receiving moisture. So you need a really good soaking in January and one in February. Now, I'm not saying don't give it any in July. It still needs water in July too. But don't neglect to water your pines in the wintertime.
Okay, Seth is asking, Moringa, yay or nay, beneficial or invasive?
Seth, what a great question. Moringa, yay and nay. You're not talking to a big Moringa supporter. I'll be honest. Okay. Moringa is a nice tree if you have the patience to deal with it. It grows very fast. It is edible. It has lots of benefits. It grows very fast. It will need to be maintained, and by maintained, I mean pruned. And it coppices readily. You cut it, it comes right back. You cut it again, it comes right back. It can be great in a garden area. If you want to put it in your yard, I think it's fine. It has invasive qualities because it is prolific, lots of seeds. And once you get it going, it's hard to get rid of it, which has good qualities. But Moringa, yay or nay, I'm going to say it depends on you and depends on your property.
Mike is saying he's asking if you have seen more wind damage in recent years. Are native trees more susceptible to uprooting and wind damage, or is it maintenance related?
In recent years, I really have not seen more wind damage. When we get, a haboob or a microburst, you get 70, 80 mile an hour winds, all bets are off. It's more than the structural capacity of the wood, so the tree will just split and break. Most of the wind damage that I see is due to maintenance. There's the common thought that you prune your trees before the monsoon so the wind blows through them. Most of the time, these trees become over pruned, and what it does is they've been over thinned. And so all the weight is out on the ends of the branches. So it acts as a lever arm. So the wind actually grabs that and puts a lot more stress on the branch of the tree. Trees have a natural dampening effect if you leave the crown intact. They kind of, you'll see me swaying, right? So they sway with the wind. There's a lot of videos online. If you really want to watch this, you can see some of this natural dampening effect of how trees handle the wind. When we elevate the crowns too far or overly thin the crown, that destroys that natural dampening effect and increases the opportunity for wind damage.
Okay, Lisa would like to know, how do you get the right amount of water for trees that are on the same irrigation system as your plants?
That's a very good question, Lisa, and one that's hard to answer. Most of the time you have your trees separate on one valve and your shrubs or flowers on another. If they are on the same one, you need to look at the emitters, and you can change the gallonage on the emitters. Like you have 1 gallon emitters on your shrubs, you can push it up to 4 gallon emitters on your trees, and maybe increase the timing. So as you're running it for an hour on your shrubs, they're only getting 1 gallon, but you got 4 going on the tree. You could put some extra emitters to it, so you would get more water to it that way. If you got a single system, that's about the best way you're going to do it. After a while, your system's going to become maxed out on pressure, and the plants at the very end of the line are going to get nothing, and the ones at the beginning are going to get all the water. So then you've got to change to some pressure compensating emitters and do exactly what I was just describing with different gallonages. And that's the best way to deal with that situation. Or add another line, which is difficult, or get out a hose when it gets really warm and you start to see it stressed and put a supplemental water that way.
This is actually a really good segue point. Kristen put in the website or on the chat link, the City of Tempe's Urban Forest page. So you can click on that page. And Richard had mentioned earlier that you can contact him, somebody can contact him with further follow-up questions. So if you go onto that link, you can click on there, and if you click onto tree planting, which is a little tab on the side, it gives information, Richard's contact information, his phone number and his email, so you can contact Richard through that. The other one is if you click on Tempe's new tree bait program, it'll take you to another list, and there is lots of information. There's videos on there that you can click on that Richard has put together. There's other information about trees and how to plant trees. Water, let's see, low water use, drought tolerant plant list that you can look at. It's plants, it's trees, shrubs, flowers, things like that. The other one is a link that you can go to the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association links. They have a number of brochures. So they have brochures that you can click on. It gives you landscape plants for the Arizona desert. There's also one for xeriscape ideas, landscaping, watering by the numbers. So that led into the answer that you just, the question that you just answered. But it breakdown in there and tells you about how to water the plants. And it's a really wonderful book to look at. So just want to let you guys know the link is in the chat. So thank you very much.
No, thank you for mentioning that. The water conservation website has all that information, is very well displayed there. And they're excellent resource people as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So I want to let everybody know we have way more questions than we're ever going to be able to get to. We're going through them as quickly as we can, but we're currently answering questions that were typed into the Q&A about half an hour ago. So that's how far behind we are. So here's what I'm going to say as we try to knock out as many more as we can in this last little bit. If your question doesn't get answered, please email it to me tomorrow or over the weekend. And on Monday, I will compile them all and send one list of questions to Richard so we don't bomb his inbox. So send them to me again, Kristen_Gwynn at Tempe.gov, KRISTIN_GWINN at Tempe.gov. And if you didn't write that down, you can go to Councilmember Garlid's page on the website, and there's a link to my email there. So send all of your unanswered questions to me, and I will get them to Richard, and we will get you answers, I promise. Okay.
I appreciate that, Kristen. It's really wonderful to know that there's so many great people out there with so many questions. Richard,
So
here you go.
Okay. Riley.
Hopefully that I'm answering them well enough. I guess they're, people are still asking. So hopefully the people that did ask, I'm providing good information for them. I'm happy to do it.
You're doing great.
Okay. Riley has a 2-year-old Vitex that did not flower this year. It has a lot of tiny leaves, which look a little bit unusual, but otherwise seems happy. How concerned does Riley need to be?
All right. If it's happy, I like that. Happy tree is a good thing. The one thing I'd want to look at, Riley, is the roots. Look at the vine. I want to know if you planted it yourself or you had somebody plant it for you. What I would do is look right around the trunk where it goes into the ground. Dig that out just a little bit. I mean, you can do that with a spade. You can do it with your hands. And see what that root crown looks like. You want to look to see if there's any like girdling roots going around in a circle. That would be causing stress for the tree. If it didn't flower this year, 2 years in, should have had 1 or 2 little sprigs of flower. And if the leaves are small, that's something you want to look at. They're getting ready to drop all their leaves now. So I would just have a quick look around the base of the tree. Make sure that you've got good mulch, because I love mulch. Make sure there's a little bit of water for it for the winter, and then see how it comes out on the spring.
Okay. Rupinder, you're killing me with the scientific names, but what is your opinion about having a Cedrus deodara in the valley?
The Cedrus deodara, deodar cedar. I have never seen one. I don't ever plan to see one. If I saw one, I probably wouldn't see it for a long time.
So not good.
The deodar cedar is not going to make it here.
Okay.
Beautiful tree.
Lynn has a very specific problem, and I'm not sure if this is a tree question so much as maybe a Tempe 311 question. I'm not sure. Says our African sumac tree has a power line running through it. Are there any city services that would help with this?
Okay, power line. What y'all want to know is it the line that comes off of the main feed and it's the drop to the house? Where it came off the main lines and it's actually the service line to your house? or if it is the distribution lines like in the alley or along the front yard. That's an important question for my answer.
Okay. Neil mentioned about 20 minutes ago, if mulch is referring to the Tempe Town compost, there is still a huge pile there. So that answers that question.
Great. I love to hear that.
Great, thank you.
What else we got? Let's see.
I can go back to the Sumac if you don't have the answer. If it's the line drop coming to your house, you can call your power provider. They will come and disconnect it for free. You can have your arborist prune it as around the tree. They will come back and reconnect it. I would not prune it without disconnecting. If it is in the main lines, like in the alley or in the front, the power provider will come and they will prune it for you.
That's good to know.
Let's see. When my wildflowers died out this past spring, I found that termites had eaten the bark off about 2 feet of my desert willow. Should I treat it with anything?
Generally, those are eating. Okay. There's two types of termites that we have. If they're just eating kind of the bark around the tree there, no, you really don't need to. You need to basically just break up their home, their mud tubes there, and spread them back out. You can treat with a termiticide around the base of the tree, but you most likely have some other type of wood or something in the ground that they were feeding off of, and they're just kind of cleaning off some of that bark, so to speak.
You got another one, Kristen?
That was just me talking to myself while I was muted. Sorry about that. Mike is asking, other than obviously asking Richard all these questions, what resources do you recommend with good information regarding how to plant, maintain, and irrigate trees?
Treesaregood.org. That's a website that is put out by the National Arbor Day Foundation, and there's all sorts of information on it. Lots of handouts, lots of diagrams, more than you want. You can also go to the ISA, International Society of Arboriculture website. That's isa-arbor.com. You can go to the American Society of Consulting Arborists website. There's lots of information available like that. Maricopa County Extension Office has quite a bit as well.
Okay, Linda says we have an ash tree with yellow sap oozing out of its trunk. It is next to where our elm tree died. So what does the sap mean?
Yellow, well, how much yellow sap? Right now, there are some sucking insects that you will find that are piercing, and there's just a little bit of sap coming out. You can get that from some of the cicadas that we had earlier in the year. If you've got a lot of yellow sap, I gotta know how old and big the tree is. It could be some sun scald damage where the bark has been damaged and the sap is oozing out from under it. It could also be sign of a fungal disease.
She says it's oozing about 3 to 4 feet long. I don't know what that means.
No, unfortunately I do. I would ask you need to get an arborist to come look at that for you. That is not sounding very good. If it's sapping that much, hopefully it's hardening off and it's like not continuous. What you want to do is look at that bark area right there and see if it's just like a little slit or if it's a hole where something is drilled into it. That's going to tell you a whole big difference of what's going on. but I would suggest you contact a local arborist and see if you could have somebody come out and inspect it.
Okay. Let's see. Are there particular types of plants that you should put around your trees that are in some way beneficial to the trees?
Not really. The one thing I would say is don't plant flowers right around the base of your tree in a planter. You see a lot of people want to do that, and I know that looks great, but it holds too much moisture up against the trunk of the tree, and you start to get rot and decay right at the base of the roots. That said, any type of plantings around in the tree, planting things together, planting guilds, like I refer to them, it just makes everything happier. All these trees are growing together. The roots are all kind of underground. You got moisture that they're sharing. You're watering the shrubs. You're watering the tree. It just makes for a happier environment and creates a nice microclimate. So no one shrub or plant over another, but just nice groupings around it. Just no flowers right around the base.
Okay. Peggy says, woodpeckers are removing the bark from my Texas ebony. Will this kill the tree?
Yes, woodpeckers will do that to your Texas ebony. They'll make a straight line of go right across. They will not most likely kill it. It will be a little unsightly. What they're doing is they're tapping, the sap comes out, the insects come, they come eat insects. They are generally migratory. The sap suckers, woodpeckers, are migratory, so they are protected species. So unfortunately, you kind of just live with woodpeckers. If you really don't like them doing that to your tree, you can take a piece of burlap and kind of just wrap it loosely around the trunk. That will deter them because they won't come and hang on the burlap to, peck holes in the trunk. That's the best way. You can put fencing around it too. I've seen people put chicken wire, but then I've also seen the birds grabbing hold and perching on the wire and pecking through the holes. So the burlap is probably your best choice if you really don't want them. They might come back seasonally too to the same spot.
Okay, this one says, I have a 7 to 8 foot tall ficus, about 15 years old. It has gone very brown with dead leaves on the top, but still lots of green leaves below. Should the dead branches and leaves on the top be cut back?
Not at this time. You're going to wait all the way until springtime. I know that's hard to say because you're looking at brown branches. It has suffered a lot of drought and sun damage over the summer. The one thing you can do is right in the early spring, you can go see, and if you got any type of flexibility in those twigs at the top, then that is fine, and it will sprout back out. If it just snaps right off and it's crisp, well, then that part is dead, obviously, and it'll sprout back from other parts of the trunk and take over that. I really don't want to prune ficus, any dead wood and ficus too much now, as long as they're not diseased, because it can start some growth because we're getting into what I call our fall growth season. And then if we do get any type of cool weather, the frost can hurt it. Ficus, you only want to really prune in the early spring and in fall when we don't have fall that's 110 degrees.
This question is, does the city have a list of preferred or vetted vendors for tree trimming jobs?
Right now, the city does not. We don't, pick one vendor over another. I can provide you a list of where all these vendors are located. I will say you should make sure that they are certified arborists, ISA certified arborists. They should be licensed and insured. And if they balk at questions like that, then those are people that you definitely don't want to hire. But some of the websites that we talked about earlier, you can look up certified arborists by your zip code, and you can go that direction.
Okay, Stephanie says, we have a Palo Verde growing very close to our house. We just trimmed off a branch at roof height. Is there any way to block regrowth branches at the point where the prior branch was removed?
Depending on how you cut it off, it might just die back from there, depending on what kind of cut that you made. Really, no. You're going to be training the tree. You can train I can train a branch to grow around a corner. Depending on where you cut it, where the secondary branches are and where the buds are. If you cut it off, like if it's just going towards the house and you just cut it off there, you're probably going to get some resprouts. You're going to have to prune those back again to keep them from coming back that direction, and the growth will go off in another angle, if that makes sense.
Okay, a question about why so many online sites can't ship plants and trees to Arizona. Are there restrictions around Arizona that you're aware of?
There's a lot of states have certain restrictions for plant material. Some of them, if they're bare root, it's not so bad. They definitely don't like soils coming in. There's lots of restriction moving soils around the country right now. If you get, like, say, here's an example, palms. If palms are brought into the valley and being planted, most of them come from Coachella Valley and in California. They are stopped at the border and they are held in quarantine for days, and they're checked for fire ants because we don't want ants coming in, and there's certain soil diseases that they don't want coming in, and depending on where the plants are coming from, they're just very, very careful about it. So there's just, like I said, there's certain species that they will not let in, and that's just kind of the way it is in Arizona. Other states are the same. And with that, I'm going to say, don't bring firewood across state lines either. Don't go to Colorado, cut firewood because you were camping and I got 6 sticks left, and bring it back to the valley, because that is how pests move around, especially in the western states, and that can be detrimental to our urban forest.
That's great information, Richard. Thank you for sharing that.
I have one last question, and I think this one is actually for Councilmember Garlid. Folks are asking, what can we as residents do to encourage you and your fellow council members to actually invest in the urban forestry master plan, which we all supported? Didn't we as a city commit to doubling our shade by a certain date?
We did. I don't remember the date. I think they committed to that just before I got on to council. But we do have support for the urban forest master plan. I love the plan. And as a matter of fact, Richard, aren't we working on version 2 right now?
We're getting through a lot of the action items right now, and we are working through our resource base and moving forward with what our goals are.
And I think it's really important for us to move forward on that. I love the idea of bringing in more canopy to the city, cooling off the city a little bit more, making it more bike friendly and walkable. So, and that's one of the things I talked to Richard about, and was really excited about what he was doing and what he's going to continue to do to move that process forward. So that's a great question. Thank you.
I would add to that, if you are interested in letting your council members know what it is that you're interested in having them spend money on, then let them know via email, councilcommunicator@tempe.gov. They do read those, and you can also call. You can come in and speak at council meetings, certainly if this item is on an agenda, but at regular council meetings, you can schedule a public appearance and you can have either 3 or 5 minutes to talk about anything you like. So if these are issues that are important to you, and as we, juggle various competing budgetary things in the coming year, if this is something that's important to you, then let your council members know. We pass along all of those emails. They get all of the council communicators. Staff does tally all of those things. So just tell them what you want, and they do listen.
And I appreciate that support. I will say it is a partnership. I mean, we have 40 square miles in the city of Tempe, and only a little over 2% of that is actually managed by the city. So if we're going to really increase our canopy together, it's a public-private partnership. So that's why I need to work with you on, your business, your private property, as well as the city. We want to try to lead by example. And that's how we're going to meet our goals and move forward with increased canopy. It's all about planting new trees, but also maintaining the mature trees that we have. So twofold, that's how we're going to grow our canopy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Richard. And, I want to say thank you to Councilmember QB for joining us tonight. I want to thank Chris Baxter for helping us get the word out about this event. I'm so glad we did it. I think we need to have a version 2, 3, and 4. I want to thank Kristen Gwynn for helping us tonight with getting all the questions together. I really appreciate that. And Richard, especially you, I am just, it's so fascinating to listen to the questions and to the answers that you're able to give, and making it easy for people like me to be able to understand that. So thank you, and really, really appreciate the time that you've given us. And everybody just remember that to contact us, get the information to Kristen if your questions were not answered, and Richard will be able to answer those for you, hopefully. So thank you so much, Richard.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's fun. There was excellent questions.
Yeah.
And I hope people got some good information out of it. I look forward to doing it again. This is good time.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for participating and being a part of our event tonight. Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Great job, Richard. And oh, there he goes. And Doreen.
Thank you for coming, Lauren.
Thank you. That was fun. I enjoyed this. This was great.
Yeah, wow, tons of questions. There were a lot of people on the call, it seemed.
Yeah, there were a lot of great questions. Gosh. Yeah.
No queen palm questions, though. I was expecting queen palms.
Whoa.
Yeah, what about queen palms? My queen palm, I'm constantly taking off the dead leaves, well, constantly, like every month. And it just seems to be getting weaker and drooping.
I'm not trying to be rude, but queen palms do not belong in the valley.
Yeah.
That's the simple answer. Queen palms, you can look at them all over the whole Phoenix metro area. People love them, and they grow them. They have died in droves. I mean, there's dead queen palms everywhere. The heat was just too much for them. And then when the heart fronds came out in early midsummer, we had a couple of winds, and it just broke the heart fronds right out. That's why you see that dead piece just kind of hanging right in the middle. And it's just so dry, and there's not enough water, and you're going to have dead fronds continuously like that. You need to fertilize them in the early spring, and just make sure you give them water. If they're between 13 to 15 years old, it's time for a new queen palm. I consider them disposable landscape.
Yeah, sadly. We have this eucalyptus tree, and people drive to our house to look at this tree. It's in some book because there's only a couple of them. It's some rare kind of eucalyptus. It peels. It's really spectacular when it peels.
What they call the rainbow eucalyptus. It has like various colors on the bark when it peels.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a handful of them around town.
Mm-hmm.
Lauren, you have one of those?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, nice.
Hey, Richard, so are you in touch then with the Silicon Bank folks who want to donate like what, $10,000 a quarter to help plant trees and then do the planting and help with the
The last I talked with them was about a month ago through Corey at ASU, because that's the go-between. We're trying to set up a new carbon offset agreement.
Yeah.
For 115 trees.
Right.
Of which they are willing to put that money in for. So they wanted to do an October event. I was like, well, what's your protocol at the bank for meetings and stuff? Here's what mine is. Yeah. And they're like, well, maybe we're going to go for springtime instead. So we're working on the contract, but yes, the silicone, they are keen, and we will get something with them.
It's great. I don't know if this is true, but it was once rumored, it was rumored and told to me that the Bonnie was told to stop getting grants because she's being so successful, and it was just too much work for the staff to do it all. This is before you came on the scene, and so she was told to stop going after grants. Is that true?
I don't tell me for sure. I know grants are time consuming. Right now, I'm coming in for a community grant right now to do a new tree canopy study. It's due at the end of this month. I'm working with one of our contractors who is participating on that. We're going to look at, the idea is to put in a new canopy map, put it on tree equity on top of it, so I can delineate 2 neighborhoods and do a tree planting at each school in each neighborhood. And so an idea that Braden and I came up with, and Braden, I'll give him full credit, he said, let's include Guadalupe. So we're making contacts with Guadalupe, not to charge them, but we'll include it within the grant.
That's great. Yeah, that's
And
awesome.
so maybe do a tree planting at a school in Guadalupe and then one in Tempe. So that's a small grant that I'm working on now. It's only like $15,000. But there are a lot of grants out there. They are a lot of work.
Yeah.
And if there's the right one, if one I'm willing to go after, the right one's just got to come along.
Do we still have the tree planting program that people can do for Arbor Day? Do we have a program like that for Arbor Day?
I had Arbor Day last year. It was just me. In the current situation, it's hard, but yes, we do. The short answer is that when it's time for us all to get back together, yes, we do.
Right. We're still on the air. So let's see.
Is anybody there?
Any questions? Let's see. I can't see all the questions. You know, I don't know if we answered this. Someone asked, can we do anything to mitigate the hotter temperatures we're getting at night from the retained urban heat island effect for our trees?
Plant more trees during the day. I mean, increase our canopy. That's the bottom line. The heat at night, that's an issue. It doesn't necessarily affect our trees as much as the daytime, but it affects our thermal comfort. I mean, it's for, you know, it goes to the human comfort at that point. We need to really be cognizant of our building materials and our placement and our urban form that we're allowing to happen. That's probably one of the most important aspects.
By the way, I figured out how to eliminate everybody else. So their event ended, so you guys can chat. Because there were just a couple stragglers, and I wasn't sure how much more you guys were going to talk about that, and where that conversation was going to go. So it's like, I'm going to send these people away.
Oh, so you did very good monitoring the questions. That was very excellent.
Oh my God, they were split between the Q&A and the chat, so I was trying to go back and forth and trying to get them somewhat in the order they came in, and it was chaos.
That was really amazing. Kristen, you did a great job.
Yeah, that was excellent.
And Richard, honestly, that was so much fun to listen to what you had to say. And I had a couple of friends that were texting me and saying, "This is fascinating. This is fascinating." So,
well, that's good. I'm glad we had 50 people by my count at one point, which I think is fantastic for a Thursday evening.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's a really great turnout. Well,
All
right, you guys have a great evening. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you both for your support. I appreciate it greatly. Let us know. Let's do this again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, good night, Richard.
Y'all have a good evening.
Okay. Good night. Good night, Kristen. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Great job, everybody.
Bye.